One of the key activities an academic at a university goes through on a regular basis is looking for and recruiting potential graduate PhD students. A significant chunk, in many cases the majority of research, is done by PhD students, and it's a rite of passage for many people who end up in research jobs or academic jobs or even industry research jobs. Now, every academic has a slightly different process, but the reason I'm making this video is to cast some light on the particular process that we in our group currently use, and this of course may change in future, but hopefully by shedding some light on where we're coming from and how we do it will be useful for the tens or hundreds or thousands of people who look into doing PhDs every year. So first up, if you're in a reasonably high-profile lab, you will get drowned in PhD applications. So most labs that have a significant international presence are getting hundreds, if not thousands, of PhD applications per year. Now that's really fortunate in terms of a position to be in, but one of the on-flow effects of this is you have to become, well, you don't have to, but you can choose to become as efficient as possible in terms of looking through those applications, tracking them, and quickly narrowing them down to the students where in both directions they would be the best fit for your lab. These applications come in both solicited and unsolicited formats, but typically they share an email from a potential student, they have a CV attached to it, they may have a cover letter expression of interest as well. Now, these CVs in my area, which is robotics, computer vision, maybe a little bit of machine learning, tend to have a very standard format. And so there'll be the educational details, there'll be a list of a number of internships or research projects during their degrees that they've worked on, perhaps a little bit of industry experience, perhaps they did some exchanges around the world, often having done some online training courses, and other developmental activities, perhaps some papers that they've submitted or been a part of, perhaps some awards recognizing their efforts. One of the things that professionalism or increasing professionalism of modern day academia has done as a side effect is that it's very hard to sort of, from just looking at a 2-page or 4-page CV, work out which particular students are going to be potentially a really good fit for the research that you're hoping to carry out in your group. And so what we do is we typically shortlist these applications. So based on the CV, based on a number of factors, we try and whittle this list down. And so in our case, we would probably shortlist, at the moment, it would probably be 1 in 20 applicants who come to us would get on the shortlist. What are we looking for in doing that shortlisting? There's a few things. We're looking optionally for deep experience in the research field that we're interested in filling some PhD positions. So this could be visual place recognition for us, but that's entirely optional. We don't expect most applicants to have that specific skill set or that experience because that's already fairly niche. The second alternative thing we're looking for is people who have above average experience or demonstrated capabilities in some of the tool sets that will be useful. So someone who has experience with computer vision as applied to recognition. So that's not the core topic that they'd actually be working on in our lab, but it is related to, and that skill set's probably going to help them. Or a strong mathematical background, but again, in this specific area, perhaps an exemplary set of software engineering skills, perhaps some experience in machine learning in areas that are likely to be highly relevant. So you can see there already that we're looking at options for a student who might come to the lab and be a good fit. One of the reasons for this is in our system, unlike some of the other systems, PhDs are typically fairly short. And so a PhD might be 3 years flat, which isn't a lot of time. And so we don't have the luxury of structuring together a long 5-year program with extended coursework. Students will need to hit the ground running. And there's been a lot of discussion over the years about whether we should modify the PhD program, but that's the current way it works, which means that we're looking for students who are going to be able to get up to speed fairly quickly. Once someone has been shortlisted, we'll reach out to them and then we'll set up a series of 1 or 2 interviews. The first interview is a get to know you interview, and typically we'll ask the candidate questions like, why are you interested in doing a PhD? Tell us a little bit about your background and your experience, even if we've read this on your CV. And particularly, why did you reach out to our group? Now, you get a lot of advice saying that you should personally tailor your approaches to the specific lab and the specific PI in the lab. I think that's a little bit over expecting things, especially if you're applying to hundreds of labs. That's not particularly logistically feasible. And it is a very competitive market. But what we're looking for in that interview is some evidence that the candidate understands what a PhD actually involves. We're checking sort of whether they've got some naive preconceptions, like a PhD is a 3-year completely open-ended journey where there's really no constraints or outputs that they have to produce at all. And again, this is recognizing the realities of the PhD program in Australia at the moment. And hopefully some of these answers express some nuanced or sophisticated understanding of some of the things that they'd have to do in their PhD. But if not, we're happy to have that discussion and to check whether their expectations of what is in a PhD matches the reality of what it would be like in our group. In general, in that first interview, we're looking for levels of communication skills as well. Communication, verbal, written, is a big part of doing research successfully, and so we're evaluating that as well. And the candidate, of course, gets the chance to ask us questions at the end about what life would be like and any particular logistical issues that they might be interested in terms of potentially doing a PhD, things like scholarships, when they could start, and so on. After the initial getting to know you interview, the people who are involved in the interview will typically get together, they'll confer, and then there'll be a follow-up which either says, thank you very much for your time, we don't really have anything super suitable for you at this stage, or it will be something along the lines of, we do have something potentially suitable for you, or we are potentially interested in you, would you be interested in proceeding to a technical interview? And of course, the attitude here is one where we are genuinely grateful for the time that you've taken to spend interviewing with us and perhaps preparing for it. But at the same time, we are trying to work through a process where a significant fraction of the applicants, even the shortlisted ones, will not proceed through to the final stage. There's also practical reasons here. If you're a good candidate and you're applying to our lab, we fully expect you to be applying to other labs, and we fully expect a significant fraction of you to choose to go to those other labs. That's the nature of being a good talent in this field. You will have a number of options. We recognize this, but our overall process, I guess, takes this into account. If you proceed to the technical interview, we try to run a as supportive and constructive technical interview as possible. But basically what we're trying to do is find out beyond what you've written in your CV, the depth and extent of both your knowledge, but also your intuitive understanding of some key technical concepts. Our current interview process is split into 2 components. So first off, we have a straight technical component where we'll basically go through some mathematical concepts, some coding concepts, some machine learning concepts, just to check where you're coming at in terms of your understanding of some of the basic technical concepts. And again, no candidate is going to know or rarely know the answers to all of these, but we're seeing how well you go. Some of the mathematical questions are not trivial, and again, we're not necessarily expecting you to get the right answer, but we are interested in you thinking through how you are thinking through a problem and communicating how you're thinking through that problem. Because in research, there'll be lots of problems that you can't solve. Communication, working with your supervisor and your team is a key part of that. And so that process really evaluates that. And again, we will provide support. So if you get stuck for a little bit, we'll provide some extra scaffolding, some extra information. Our aim here is not to embarrass you or to make you feel any more stressed than you are already. Our aim is to really constructively work through the questions and see how you go. The second part of the interview, at the moment, we run a mock research study. So basically what this involves is compressing the first year of your PhD, which would typically involve formulating, planning, working on your first major research project. We compress this down into around a 20-minute chat. And again, there is no correct answer or no correct way to go about this. What we're interested in is seeing how you think about things, like how you think about getting data sets, how you think about assessing the performance of a system, how you would go about designing a system in an area like visual face recognition. Again, there's no specific correct way, and sometimes we get bogged down in the details of one particularly interesting area, and sometimes we actually get through at a high level crafting an entire first year research study and executing on it. It really varies from interview to interview, and this is part of the interview I particularly enjoy because it's sort of like working with one of our current PhD students. After that interview, we'll then proceed to either providing an offer to apply for a PhD, or we'll inform you that we don't have anything suitable. And I really want to emphasize, and I think this is true for just about everyone, the PhD process is really about finding a good fit in both directions. And just because you don't get a particular offer with a particular group says just as much about the particulars of that supervisor in that group as it does about you. So it's about fit just as much as it is about your capabilities and skill set. I know it can feel very personal the first few times you do it, but just about all of the time it's not personal. And in many cases, we've had really great candidates who we couldn't take on because we didn't have quite the right project or it wasn't quite the right fit. And they've gone on to stellar, spectacular careers around the world. And of course, we get it wrong as well occasionally too. Another thing I should probably emphasize about the process is different academics will have different attitudes. So some academics are really looking for that gem in the rough, and they will invest huge amounts of effort and time with candidates to find really great candidates. We do that as well, but one of the things you should be aware of is that in a lot of cases, interviewing candidates is also risk mitigation. And so while we want to recruit every top student that we can get based on whatever PhD scholarships or resources we have, we also want to reduce the risk of recruiting a PhD student who, for whatever reason, and it could just as much be on our lab as on the individual, is going to have a bad time in our group. And so because that consumes a lot of energy, it can be miserable for both the student and the supervisor, and it's often just a compatibility thing or a misconception and things. So a lot of the interview process and the vetting process is about reducing, not eliminating, because you can never do that, but reducing the risk of that unexpectedly becoming an issue during the student's candidature. So every academic, every group does this a different way. You will hear all sorts of advice on the web from prominent professors about how they like PhD students to apply to them. If you're applying to that specific professor, then you should probably listen to what they're requesting. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry too much about their advice because people have very different expectations. This is sort of how we do it now. We reserve the right to change this process, and we will continually tinker away at this process. My colleagues and I are always sort of wondering whether this question should be in the interview or whether we should remove it and replace it with something else. We are trying to improve our process to make it as good for our group, but also for the candidates who are interviewing as well. So I hope that helps. I hope that's interesting or provides a bit of a perspective of sort of what it looks like from the other side. We're always grateful for students who apply to our group. We're always very grateful for them to spend the time, and if there is an offer, for them to consider doing a PhD with us. And best of luck with your PhD journey.